Hey everybody, Ed from Paranormal Inc. Ohio here. I'm here with another ghost story tonight. Tonight's ghost story is by request. It is the Amityville Horror House. Now, the Amityville House has been there forever, and it's all known by its legend, and I'm going to tell you from start to finish. In the early 1970s and 1974, the DeFeo family had moved into the Amityville Horror House. And Ronnie DeFeo Sr. was not really the greatest dad. He was very mean, very strict, very stern, and was very mean towards Ronnie DeFeo Jr., aka Butch was his nickname. And Butch, it caused Butch to grow up to be a very bad kid, if you can see what I'm saying. He was always in and out of trouble, and they owned their own auto shop, which Ronnie DeFeo Jr. Butch worked at, but he never came to work. He'd always go to the bar. He'd be getting drunk. He eventually got hooked on drugs, and it led to some things that happened in the house. It led to him going after his dad with a gun and violently attacking his family. So early morning, one November morning at 3:15 a.m., Ronnie DeFeo went room to room with his rifle and killed each and every one of his family members. He then, after he killed them, took a shower, got dressed, went to work, worked his job, worked it all day, came home. Once he got home, he then called the police and told them that, hey, the bodies of my family are here. I need somebody to get here fast. So when the cops get there, they question Ronnie, and the only thing Butch could come up with is it was a mafia hit. And the mafia came and forced Ronnie DeFeo Jr., Butch, by gunpoint to kill each and every one of his family. And the cops just weren't buying it. So they started questioning, what he was doing, what was going on. And eventually, after all this pressure, he cracked and he said that he killed his family. But he also then he said that he heard voices inside the house that was telling him to kill his family, that each and every day the voices would get louder and louder and would just kept saying, kill them, kill them, kill them, kill them, kill them. So eventually he did. Now, the crazy thing about this is they got Ronnie, they put him in the jail for holding till his court, and they went and asked neighbors what they heard or what they saw. Every neighbor that night, or that early morning, said they never heard a gunshot. The only thing they heard was the dog barking. This was a very high-powered rifle that Ronnie used to kill his family with. They also stated that the family members were all found sleeping in their bed. Like they weren't woke up by a gunshot or anything. They just laid there and took the shots, which was also kind of weird. So, but anyhow, the police did not care. They had their man. Now they just got to wait for trial. Ronnie DeFeo Jr., Butch, was sentenced to 6 life sentences, where he ended up dying in prison serving his 6 life sentences. But some of the prison guards that was around Butch would say crazy things would happen in his cell. They would hear voices in his cell at night, and then Ronnie was by himself in his cell. And so they ran to the cell to see who was with Ronnie, and nobody was there. And Ronnie would be fast asleep. There was also times where the guards would, they would get ready to go tell Ronnie, hey, we're taking you to chow to go get lunch or dinner. And they would turn around and turn back, and somehow Ronnie's out of the cell, in front of the cell door. The cell is closed and locked. These are actual statements from corrections officers saying that this stuff would happen. And Ronnie DeFeo never turned on his story, on his word, that something in that house told them to kill his family. Not one. If you guys see me looking up, it's because I'm at my son's baseball practice. Sorry. But he never swerved from that story. And that is the story he stuck with until he passed away. Now, let's move to the next family that not even a year later moved into the house. The Lutz families, George and Kathy Lutz. They were looking for a home for so long to call their own for their family. They looked and looked and looked and looked and looked, and then they finally found their dream home, the Amityville house. They put a sign out that said high hopes for this home. They looked through it. The realtor then told them, because they didn't recognize the house at first. And then the realtor finally told them that the DeFeo family was brutally murdered by Ronnie DeFeo Jr. And even then, they could not turn their back on this home. It was a 6-bedroom home for, I believe it was $80,000 is all they paid for it. So they moved in. Right away, they fell in love with it. They were getting things set up, getting things moving on. But they started noticing a difference in George Lutz. He went from being a very charismatic, outgoing, hardworking man to a very sluggish, very moody, very angry person. Suddenly, right as soon as after they moved in. Every night at 3:15 in the morning, 3:15 in the morning, George Lutz would wake up and couldn't go back to sleep. Later on, he found out that was the exact time in November when Ronnie DeFeo Jr., Butch, killed his family. It was at 3:15 a.m. They would hear things in the house. They would hear get out. They would hear knocks. They would hear, the normal paranormal activity inside of a home. Then they found a room in the basement that was not on the original floor plans. They had to get through a wall to get to it. And this room was painted blood red. And it had a terrible odor that came out of it. George also had an instance where he looked at his wife while she was sleeping on the couch. And her face aged in front of his eyes. And she looked like she was 90 years old. And this was corroborated by the mother of Kathy. She looked and saw that her face had changed. They found green ooze coming out of the walls that would come from the ceiling down to the bottom. They would lose track of time. But when George would leave the house and go out, he would be perfectly fine. He was that old George Lutz that he was before. But the second he got back in the house is when things would change. He would go back to being that very angry, sluggish person. So the Lutz family decided to get a hold of a priest to come and bless the home. Well, the priest came. He walked through the house. Immediately fell ill. He told them, I heard a voice saying, get out. And he would try to continue to go against this thing and got flu-like symptoms as he was there. He finally left and became very ill afterwards and never came back to the house again. They also had instances that in the wintertime that there was a room full of flies in the winter that was always in this room, this one room. They would find cloven hoof marks in the snow leading to their door to the house. When they tried to take the family dog downstairs to see the new room, the dog, as George said, I don't know why he did this. He has never cowered away from anything. He has always just gone for it. This is very strange. He will not go in this room. And then the short 28 days that they stayed in this house, I believe it was the night before the final night, George was woke up by the sound of music, like there was dancing downstairs. He heard people moving around. And he ran downstairs to his living room expecting to see a bunch of people, and there was nobody there. But the rug was rolled up, the furniture was moved. Then the night of the terrible things that happened, and the night before that morning, they had a terrible night. George finally just snapped and started acting crazy, was going after the kids, was going after Kathy. Kind of like you see in the movie, but it was different. So they moved out of the house, and they did not take anything with them. They left all their belongings, their furniture, books, shoes, clothing, everything was left, and they never came back. And George Lutz said in an interview in 2005, he said, you have to realize we did not know we was going to leave that house like that. We didn't know that we was never going to come back. That was the house's doing that caused us to do that. And we will never go back in that house again. So, an author by the name of Jay Anson decided to write the book of the Amityville Horror of the Lutz's experience. Mr. Anson wrote this book. He wrote it for a very long time. But the reason he said why he decided to write this book and to write all these crazy coincidences, as people say, down, was he met the priest that actually went and tried to help and corroborated everything that was in that story. So then he decided, I'm going to write this book. So he writes the book, and after he writes the book, he has a heart attack. He blamed it on his smoking. He didn't blame it on the book. But he said it's kind of funny because before the book was published, I had 3 friends that got a hold of the manuscript before it was published. One friend was taking the manuscript to the publisher, and his car burst into flames. And when they checked the wreckage, he survived the fire. And when they checked the wreckage, they found the only thing that was okay out of this entire fire was the manuscript. The second friend, him and his son, wrecked into a lake with their car, almost drowning in their car, but they got free. But when they pulled the car out to check the car, the manuscript was in the trunk. And the only thing it was in was a manila envelope, and it was dry. The third copy made it to one of his friends. That very night, she died in a house fire. And they went through the wreckage of the house and all the burnings, and they found the manuscript completely intact. Nothing wrong with it. So is there a curse that comes with the Amityville house? I don't know. But I'm not going to say that there's not. I have an open mind about all these things. But there's been 4 families that lives in the house after the Lutz family lived there. And they said that there's rarely any paranormal activities. The only thing they see is the youngest son of the DeFeo family. He comes out and looks around. And they'll hear, first when they go in, they hear get out. And then they don't hear anything. And then everything stops. So, like I said, is it an active curse? Was there something in the house before the DeFeo family even moved in there? Is there something still in the house? I don't know. I would love to find out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this ghost story. I thank you very, very much for coming and checking it out. I love each and every one of you. That's why I continue to do this. I know I say this every week. I sound like a broken record. But you guys need to hear that from me, how much I appreciate and love you guys. Fear Friday will be this Friday at 10 p.m. live. I hope to see you all there. And I hope you guys are having a great, great, great evening. Thank you, and have a good one.